Hey there, and welcome back to the Natural Fertility and Wellness Podcast, where we talk about both natural ways to balance our hormones and increase fertility. I'm Danielle from naturalfertilityandwellness.com, and today we're going to look at the importance of vitamin D with Lydia Shatney, a certified nutritional therapy practitioner. Now, please remember that this information is for educational purposes only and is not a medical diagnosis or treatment plan. It's always important to discuss dietary and supplement protocol needs with your healthcare practitioner. All that said, let's jump right in. So, Lydia, why don't we go ahead and just jump in? Can you explain what vitamin D is and why it's so important for our health?
I sure can. It's vastly important, and it's a big topic. And I'm glad you asked me to talk about it today. And the term vitamin D actually is a little misleading because it actually refers to, it's one of a group of fat-soluble vitamins, but it also serves as like a pre-hormone or a hormone precursor to the actual active form of vitamin D, and that's called calcitriol. And that's responsible for regulating over 2,000 genes in your body. So nearly every cell of our body has receptors for vitamin D. So that alone tells us it's pretty important. But I'm going to point out a little later, it's not a standalone nutrient, which is super important to keep in mind. But, you know, among the more well-known forms of vitamin D in terms of the one that we probably are meaning the most is vitamin D3. And that's cholecalciferol. And that's going to be found in when you get what you get from the sun, your body will make from the sun. And then it can be in foods like fish, egg yolks, cheese maybe, organ meats. But then there's another form, and that's considered ergocalciferol, and that would be vitamin D2. And that's actually synthesized by plants, so like mushrooms. But it's also added to our food. So any foods that are fortified, like commercial foods, processed foods, they're going to have the vitamin D2 added to it, which is actually not good for us. So that's something to keep in mind, and another reason why we promote real food, right? So mostly, though, we make vitamin D in our skin from the sun, and that's when our skin's going to be exposed to the UVB rays. So it's not just the UVA. So initially, when we get this form of vitamin D from the sun, it's actually going to travel to our liver, where it's going to be converted into another more active form of vitamin D, which is the vitamin D they test. It's called 25-hydroxy vitamin D. And this is, you know, what your doctor will be testing typically if you get routine blood work, and that's going to be like the stored vitamin D, okay? But when it leaves the liver, it actually is going to travel to the kidneys, and it's going to be converted into a more highly active form called calcitriol, and this is more of the active form. So most often you're not going to be having a doctor test you for that form. Okay, so now this is when it actually isn't a vitamin anymore, but more of a steroid hormone. So that's the real straightforward, simplistic, basic rundown of this awesome nutrient.
So a little bit more in depth, I guess, than say other simple vitamins, because that, you know, we say it's a precursor to steroid hormones. You know, other vitamins don't necessarily act that way in the body.
Right.
And what I've seen lately, and one of the reasons that, you know, I asked you to do this interview was to kind of talk about some of the dangers of supplementation. Because, you know, even just a few years ago, I went to a real food type of a conference, and they had a speaker come in and talk all about vitamin D. And he basically, you know, said everybody should be on at least 5,000 IUs to 10,000 a day. You know, his supplements that he actually sold, he did 50,000 and 100,000 IUs, and he wanted to see everybody really, really high up in their levels. And just following you a little bit on social media, you know, come to find out, supplementing isn't necessarily, you know, the best thing to do unless you know what's going on. So I'd love for you to talk about kind of the other side of vitamin D and what some of those dangers might be.
Yeah. And it really is the mainstream misunderstanding that most people are hearing, what you just shared. And honestly, that's kind of how I learned it long ago. But as I got into understanding the mineral system through hair analysis, that's when my eyes were open to, whoa, this is, widely misunderstood, way more complex than I ever knew. And so in my line of work, when I actually, look at vitamin D, it's going to be much broader, much deeper, a much deeper lens. And it really helps avoid the pitfalls of singling out any one nutrient and isolated supplementation.
Sure.
Because some of the health issues that are very common today, like hypothyroidism, osteoporosis, heart issues, I'm hearing more women with anxiety and panic attacks and things like that are all going to be worsened potentially with too much vitamin D and not understanding how it works. So I feel it's overdosed in many cases. Even just what you said, that scares me, because if someone were to do that for a very long time, it really could be a bad scenario. I've had a couple clients who figured this out the hard way because they listen to their doctor, who is not educated in nutrition and the mineral system. And they got worse before they got understood, oh my gosh, it's my vitamin D. So I don't want to scare people, but I do want to educate people. It's really important, because when we're very haphazard or, just believing all these different mainstream, oh, you got to have vitamin D high, we should really stop and say, well, wait a minute, if my vitamin D is low and I'm taking all these supplements, what's really going on here? It's like if you had an oil leak in your car and you just kept adding oil and adding oil and adding oil and it kept leaking out and leaking out. I mean, nobody does that. They go and figure out why it's leaking out, right? Right. So it's not exact, direct, analogy there, but it gets the point across. So anyway, I also, because I started looking into this more deeply, there's just not a lot of actual solid scientific evidence about the long-term safety of high-dose vitamin D supplementation. So, and most people aren't going to be going and doing all this research about it. They're just going to do what some expert says. But some researchers do say that high levels of vitamin D supplementation can actually lead to kidney stones, for one thing. And this is going to occur when the body is trying to get rid of the excess calcium in the body through the kidneys. Real quick, vitamin D's job is to kind of push up the calcium. It's supposed to help the calcium get where it's supposed to go. Okay. But in a minute, we're going to talk more about that. There's a lot more to it than just vitamin D and calcium. We need all these cofactors and all these things in the body to be working right. So when you're taking all this vitamin D supplementation, especially the high dose, like you just stated, over the long term, it could really lead to something like kidney stones, especially in those high doses. Also, if your body can't actually regulate your calcium levels appropriately, which I see all the time, this mineral, the calcium, is actually going to deposit itself throughout the soft tissues of the body, including the arteries. So if you think about calcium for 1 second, calcium has a kind of a hardening effect in the body. And if you think about calcium can harden concrete. If you think about chalk, it's calcium carbonate and it can easily snap, right? So if we have just calcium and none of its cofactors and all the other working parts, think about what that could do inside the body, right? So that's what I try to tell people to help them kind of get a little bit better picture. It has a hardening effect in your body alone, and we don't want that. And that's what I see all the time. And I've especially seen this trend in health circles where women who have issues like hypothyroidism, for example, you might find some of these really popular thyroid websites out there that have a lot of great intention and great information, but a lot of times there's a lot of DIY health advice going on, being thrown around. And a common theme I've seen is high dose vitamin D, high dose vitamin D. Oh, you have this problem? Take some vitamin D. And I really, it gets my back up a little because I've seen how it can be very problematic understanding how it really works in the body. So that's really risky when, you're reading into your health and you're not understanding what one nutrient can do for you. So that's just my little fair warning, guys. If you're hearing some person who doesn't have a disclaimer in place to take care of your health, you may want to think twice before you take a lot of vitamin D. But the reason why this is a problem specifically for hypothyroidism is because, let's say you don't even have hypothyroidism as a diagnosis, but you have the symptoms, okay? It's possible to experience what I call thyroid hormone resistance, because remember how I just said the calcium will have a hardening effect in the body? It can make your cells less permeable. So whatever thyroid hormone you are making, let's say you're making thyroid hormone just fine. Well, it's not going to get into your cells effectively. And so we know we need thyroid hormone for everything, right? So if it's not getting into our cells, it's going to have a slowing down effect on us overall, right? Which leads to all the downstream effects. So what if you have diagnosed hypothyroidism and you're not making sufficient hormone on your own, and you have this tissue calcium that's too high and it can't go anywhere? Then you're going to have like a double whammy where you don't make enough thyroid hormone and you can't get it into the cells. So you may find that if you're on thyroid hormone, it's not like doing much for you. Maybe it's doing a little. So, and we know that, your thyroid health is so important for fertility, right? So I'm sure your readers are aware, and you probably covered this one.
Yeah.
So really the biggest issue I see with vitamin D is just the misunderstanding of how it works in the body and what cofactor nutrients are involved, and they're just never considered. So when you hear about vitamin D, no one ever talks about anything else, and they only are testing storage vitamin D, and half the time people aren't even testing their vitamin D before they even start supplementing. So this is going at it blindly, and it's just not a good idea. I'm not saying any of this to say vitamin D is not important, that we don't need it, and that it's, hopefully people aren't taking it the wrong way, because sometimes they'll hear me say this and think, but don't we need vitamin D? Yes, but you need to understand how, it works in the body. So I don't like just pushing a blood level, I want to know, well, why is it low, or what should it be, and what else should be going on? And that's how I kind of operate and look at things more holistically speaking. So that's pretty huge. I've seen it time and time again. And plus, it's a fat-soluble vitamin. So if you take too much, you don't need it, your body's just going to store it, and then it's going to be in your fat tissue. So another big problem, and I've said this, is that we don't consider the cofactor nutrients. So let's talk about that for a minute.
All right.
Because I know you take a whole food, real food approach, and probably have taught people about the Weston Price findings and everything like that. So, and which is cool. So let's talk about it a little bit more holistically in terms of the other nutrients. Actually, the Vitamin D Council states that to get the most benefit from vitamin D, you have to have these other cofactors in your body. And vitamin D has plenty. So first off, it's one of 3 fat-soluble vitamins that work synergistically together. So there's vitamin A and K2, and we need them both in place in the right amounts to protect us against vitamin D in excess or becoming toxic in the body. So when we hear about taking vitamin D, we really need to be thinking about these other 2 fat-soluble vitamins as well. And you and I both know the food sources, and we'll get there in a minute. And it's likely not most of us are getting that in our diet today. The foods that vitamin A and K2 are in, most people aren't eating adequately, right?
Right, yeah.
So that's a big deal. And then Weston Price found these nutrients work together in certain kind of proportions, so if we go back to that research, we can see that, right? But we're not being told that today. Also, we can see that sufficient levels of potassium and magnesium are really critical in protecting against vitamin D toxicity, because both will actually be depleted. If you're taking too much vitamin D, pushing up calcium, your vitamin A will be depleted, your potassium will be depleted. And why that's important is potassium is a huge mineral. We need like 4,700 milligrams a day of potassium. And if you look at different foods that contain potassium, you got to eat a lot of them. Like everybody's like, oh, I eat bananas, right? Because that's what everyone thinks. That's why everyone's like, oh, that has potassium. Well, one banana's got like 300 something milligrams of potassium, right? So we're not paying attention to this, because we're just trying to get through life. So a lot of people aren't getting enough potassium, for one thing. When you have hypothyroidism type symptoms, you probably have adrenal issues. When you have adrenal issues, you really don't hold, especially if your adrenals are kind of on the taxed, exhausted side, it's really hard to hold on to potassium. And so it gets depleted very quickly, and we really need it to feel better. And then we can have all kinds of problems like anxiety, heart palpitations, arrhythmias. It's ridiculous. So potassium is important. Magnesium is important. And, most of us are just deficient in these nutrients, and I see it all the time, especially on the hair analysis. Doctors aren't really testing this kind of thing. They're just doing a typical CBC, which is your complete blood chemistry that you get probably annually when you go in, right? And they're testing your serum magnesium, which isn't really helpful. We actually can't really tell much from that alone. It's usually pretty normal because your blood works really hard to stay, optimal there. So I look at the red blood cell count, which is more sensitive than the serum, because when the body becomes magnesium deficient, it pulls that magnesium that's stored in the red blood cells out of those cells and into the serum of the blood. That's why usually your serum is going to be fine. So it's not going to really show the true deficiency. Now, speaking of magnesium, I don't know if you've talked about magnesium on your site at all, but
a little bit so far.
Okay. So cool. Well, I love magnesium. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So really quick, let's just do a little mini magnesium lesson, because this is important for anybody, including, people, focused on fertility. We just don't get enough anymore in our modern day diet. It's depleted. It's not in our soil. It's lost by stress, by sugar, by medication, and so much more. And it's involved in every body function, right? So, it's also really important to make ATP, which is our body's main form of energy. So you're probably dealing with people who don't have a lot of energy at times, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And magnesium's role in vitamin D is that it helps with proper vitamin D activity and function, and it can help maintain the calcium balance. And it modulates the sensitivity of our tissues to vitamin D. So it's pretty important. So in order for us to actually absorb calcium, vitamin D needs magnesium. And that's like the whole goal, right? Is vitamin D is trying to get us to absorb our calcium, but we can't do it without the magnesium, right?
Okay.
So it's pretty important. So without the magnesium, and a lot of times, I don't know, sometimes people are being told still to take calcium supplements, right? I don't know if you run into that with the folks you're working with, but so put together the vitamin D and the calcium and nothing else, and you can imagine what's going to happen. It's a nightmare. So, because calcium has an antagonistic effect on magnesium, and it can just exacerbate this magnesium deficiency even worse. And magnesium deficiency is really detrimental to our health. It puts us at increased risk for even a heart attack if it gets really bad, if it gets really, really low. I've seen it in people with panic attacks and severe hypoglycemic reactions and things like that. That's an extreme case. But even in a mild case of magnesium deficiency, you can have trouble relaxing, tension, not as good sleep, a little more irritable. And so, that's important to consider as well. So magnesium's great, vitamin A, vitamin K2, which we don't hear anything about in the mainstream, right? But Wes and Price talked about it, and we still don't know enough about it from that period of time, because we're just not eating it adequately in the diet. We also have serious gut problems anymore, and we know we need good gut microbiome to help us produce some of our vitamin K2. So vitamin K is going to actually allow the body to use the calcium to perform its clotting function. And if it's low, the body can't really use calcium in this way. So there we go. Another big problem, right? And we need that K2 also for our bones and teeth. So, typically we've heard drink your milk to get your calcium to have strong bones. And you and I both know that's not enough, right?
Right.
So that's a pretty big deal. We need K2 for calcium to work properly, and vitamin D's job is to make calcium work too. So again, here's another cofactor. So I said about vitamin A, magnesium, I keep dropping my earbud, sorry, and K2. And so that's pretty important, and nobody's asking questions about that. So then, what's the point of pushing your vitamin D when you're not even concerned about these other important pieces that actually make this whole thing work? So and I could go into more in depth about it, and there's other nutrients that I didn't even touch on, but I think that gives us enough food for thought to really question how we approach vitamin D a little bit more, probably, right?
Yes, that was awesome. Thank you. So what then are optimal vitamin D levels, and what do we do if the lab tests that our doctors take come back with low levels? And then kind of as a secondary question, I've also had a lot of women who have, been on supplementation, or they're working with their doctors, and they continue to have low levels, and nothing they're doing is bringing those back up to where their doctor wants them. What might be going on there?
Well, let's define low levels. First off, a true actual vitamin D deficiency is going to be more serious, and it can cause bone abnormalities like rickets and osteomalacia. And that's when your storage blood levels are below 25 for, a while. But also those cofactors are important too. And so a lot of doctors today are recommending really high levels of vitamin D storage, which anywhere between 50 and 100. And sometimes, they want it 75 or higher in somebody who has autoimmune issues or something like that. And there's really no solid evidence that this is necessary. So some of the older research is kind of being questioned more. So there's some good PubMed articles. I'll give you a link for one. Chris Kresser, who's really does his research and keeps up on this, he has a good article. So does Chris Masterjohn. Some of these guys who are staying up on it. Morley Robbins, who's an HTMA guy, Dr. Malter. So there's a lot of people out there who are digging deeper. And what I have found is that, the range that I like to see is somewhere at 35 to 40, maybe up to 60.
Okay.
Now, there's more to it than just that. But, if you are below 25, that's when you want to maybe do a little deeper digging, and we'll get to that in a second. But just if you're getting it by your doctor, they're looking at that 25 hydroxy stored vitamin D. So if they say it's low and it's 35, you may want to question them. And it's okay to question your doctor, by the way. I know a lot of people don't think that, but you can and you should, because they were not educated in nutrition. Now, I'm not trying to make a doctor look bad. That's just the truth of the matter. So when it comes to, let's say your levels are below 25 and you start supplementing and they still stay low, like that for some reason. That's when you really want to work with somebody who can help you get to the root of it, because it could be you're not getting those cofactors I talked about, or your body just can't utilize it properly for some reason and it's just getting stored, or you have inflammation. Maybe you have a chronic inflammatory disease or an autoimmune condition, because our intestinal health does play a role in vitamin D and calcium metabolism. And you and I both know that there's usually some kind of maybe leaky gut, absorption issue in these kind of health conditions. So that's vast. So we don't have time to go into that. But if you're someone who's testing your vitamin D twice a year or 3 times a year or whatever it is you do, and it's below 25 all the time, and you're supplementing, that's when you want to do a little deeper digging and get to the root. There's also some genetic mutations. So we have vitamin D receptors, and we can have genetic mutations of our specific vitamin D receptors. I don't want to go into that too much because that's not where my training lies, but I do know sometimes people have one that makes it hard for our levels to ever get very high.
Okay.
So that's a whole nother thing. But with that in mind, it's just important for people to know there could be other reasons, rather than just, here, keep taking vitamin D and see if my number goes up. That's just the really old way of thinking. So just a couple things for people to think about when they're looking at that piece.
Right. Now, the test that the doctors run, you've mentioned that one a couple of times. Is that the best test that we have right now, or are there other better ways to check for vitamin D for the body?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked. So if you really want to be thorough, it's a good idea to, that's a good starting point. Like if people aren't ready to do much deeper digging, don't supplement until you test. And then when you test, ask some questions. If your doctor says it's low and it's really not low, then you have something to go on and you can start to maybe investigate further. But I just don't think people should touch a vitamin D supplement until they know. It's because you're guessing and you're not considering how it's going to affect your calcium and other nutrients in your body, like we just mentioned. So one thing to also know about vitamin D supplementation, before I talk about the testing, is that it actually has a half-life of 4 to 6 months in the body. So it's really easy to overdo it, because with the Sunshine D has a much shorter storage in our body. So so you could end up having like a backlog of vitamin D in your fat tissues that you just don't need and eventually have to get rid of. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So in terms of testing, definitely test first before you ever touch a vitamin D supplement. Some people do need a little bit of vitamin D supplements, by the way. So that storage vitamin D your doctor will test is a good one to start, especially if you live in a northern climate where you're not going to be in the sun in the winter. Every fall you might as well take a look and just see if it's below 25. Maybe a little bit of vitamin D supplementation partnered with the cofactors could help you get through the winter, right? And then there's also going to be, I talked about the magnesium earlier. So I actually like to test people's red blood cell, RBC, magnesium, not serum. Because if it's low, you could take all the vitamin D in the world and it's just not going to do what it's supposed to.
Okay.
So you want to have robust tissue stores of magnesium. And your doctors usually aren't going to run this. You have to specifically ask. I would just do it yourself. So it's easy enough to go order this online. There's lots of places and ways to do it, or work with somebody who will help you with all the pieces. But I like to see it, between 6.5 and 7. Below 6 is low. I've seen a ton of these. Nobody has good magnesium. Nobody. A few people do, but they worked at it. So I see that all the time. And the other thing I like to look at too, personally, is that active vitamin D, because even if your stored vitamin D is on the lower end, you could have adequate active vitamin D. And, maybe it's not as bad as it seems when your vitamin D is working properly in that piece. There's another thing too, if it's okay to keep going with this.
Oh yeah.
Parathyroid hormone stimulates the active form of vitamin D. So sometimes there may be a case where someone could test their parathyroid hormone to get a more full picture. So like people who are borderline low in their vitamin D and they're supplementing, maybe they want to see this marker to see if they really do need supplementation or not. And then, people with parathyroid disorders have to be really careful with vitamin D. And that's something, I'm just going to say it so people can, understand that's a piece. But you would really need to work with someone on that. And usually not many doctors are looking at it unless it's like a more serious case. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So all that to say, if you're not testing through a full spectrum approach or don't plan to, then you really shouldn't supplement with any significant dose of vitamin D by itself. Even if some guru said take 50,000 IU every week during the winter. So, and that goes where we question everything and we really want to be careful for our health, especially when, we're considering trying to prepare our bodies to have babies, because this is going to affect them too. So it's just so important not to supplement blindly. So let's say you get your vitamin D levels tested by your doctor and it's really low, like it's lower than 25 or 20. You're going to want to try to pay more attention to your sun exposure. And you might want to take some cod liver oil, because then that way you're at least making sure you're getting that vitamin A along with the D. And maybe consider your magnesium too. That's going to be, everybody really could use some magnesium. Mm-hmm. And then if it's really high, like if it's over 50 or even 60, you really should probably stop taking vitamin D. And make sure you're really focusing on those other cofactors. So a lot of times I'll see people with really high tissue calcium, low tissue potassium, thyroid hormone resistance, low magnesium, poor zinc. It could go on. And I would rather them focus on getting all these synergistic nutrients before they do too much more with vitamin D, unless they have crazy low levels or something. So that's kind of how I look at it in my practice with individuals. And I know not everyone's going to go that route. But hopefully just sharing this will help people think a little bit more holistically
right.
what they're doing with just vitamin D. So
yeah, that's perfect information. So besides supplementing and trying to work with someone, what are natural ways that everybody can make sure we get enough vitamin D in our diet and our lifestyle? Because you mentioned a couple of times, you shouldn't supplement blindly. Well, what if we know we're low or a little low and just kind of want to work with our diet a little bit to get in more whole food sources? How do we do that?
Well, the first thing we should all try to do is in the months of the year when it's warm, get out in the sun. With optimum health, if you have good health, your body will really be able to utilize the sunshine form of vitamin D. So right now it's 65 degrees in February where I live. Yesterday it was 71. I was like, I'm outside. So I know it's hard in the winter, in a lot of cases to get sun on enough of your skin, but the rest of the year you can pay attention to that. And then just leading into the winter, you may want to start with food forms. So cod liver oil is probably the best one. Not everybody likes the idea of that, so you can take pills, believe it or not. I like the Rosita's the best. That's currently my favorite because it has a really good ratio of vitamin A to D. But our sunshine vitamin D has about a half-life of 4 to 6 weeks. So if you're getting repeat sun exposure throughout the whole summer, you can store some of that. So foods would be blood sausage or blood.
Yum.
I don't know too many people who are into that. That's like way high. That was a traditional food that Weston Price learned about, and I'm not into it. Then your standard cod liver oil. So you could do the liquid form. If you just don't like it, there are capsules available too. Herring, not many people eat herring. Duck eggs has some, not a ton, but more than chicken eggs. Rainbow trout, sockeye salmon, sardines, especially the ones canned in oil. Chicken eggs have a little. Cow's liver doesn't have really that much, surprisingly. A lot of people think it does. And then even like lard from pastured pork or any of the fat from pastured pork, we don't really know how much you're getting.
Okay.
So, and a lot of those foods that I just shared, most people aren't eating regularly. I know the people in the real food circles probably are getting more. But those are some really good food options. I just think, awareness about your sun exposure when you can throughout the year, when it's possible, and cod liver oil are probably the two best approaches. If you have more serious health conditions, you may need a different approach. And then you're going to want to make sure you're getting those cofactor nutrients too. So if you're really going with diet alone, you kind of have to work a little harder at it. I wish diet alone was good enough these days. So, but I have a post on my website if you want to link to it about the fat soluble vitamins. It's got some food sources of each and amounts with numbers and stuff, so people can take a look at that.
Perfect.
But in northern climates, you do really want to test and maybe get an approach if you're looking to have optimal health to get you through the winter, to make sure your fat soluble vitamins are balanced. I do want to say about one product that I know of that I like. It's a great K2 product. It's called Megaquinone K27. And I really like it because it has the cofactors. It has magnesium, zinc, and boron, and some K1. So that's nice, right? Because you need all those nutrients for K2 to work, but also for vitamin D and magnesium partnered together. And then like the Rosita's cod liver, which you can get through a place like Perfect Supplements. So those two could be something that if people want to supplement, that would be a much safer, more effective plan than just going out and taking a bunch of vitamin D.
Right.
So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of this information. I hope that at some point we can, start to dial back on the massive amounts of vitamin D supplementation our culture has become so accustomed to. And I find that, especially so many women who are trying to conceive, especially when they start having problems, they just start adding in supplements. And vitamin D is usually one of the first ones, and they'll take quite a bit of it. So it's good to know how to look at it in a little bit more of a holistic manner. Right.
And I just want to say the good intentions are there. Like, I really do believe people have good intentions, but it's just misinformation. So that's what this is all about today, is to educate you, empower you, and help you to have more information at your ready so you can make better choices with all your good intentions that, a lot of times people are trying to do with just this information about vitamin D that we've heard so much of. So,
right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. I had a lot of fun talking with you. I don't think we've actually talked to face to face before.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So,
Right. Yeah, it's been a while.
benefits of the internet, huh?
Right.
So,
Right.
awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I love this topic a lot. I'm very passionate about it, and I like people to get more holistically educated about things so they can make better choices.
Well, and we'll link to your website so that if people are looking for someone who can help them put all the pieces together and, work especially on kind of a mineral level with getting their health back, that they can pop over and see you and what you offer.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thank you all for joining me today. You can find Lydia at divinehealthfromtheinsideout.com. The link is right below this video. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button to be notified the next time we have a new video up.